All right, well, let's start with the first game of the college football season, which is naturally in Dublin for Farmageddon. And it's a conference game, which I personally hate. It's the Big 12, which is probably going to be chaotic. There's probably going to be tiebreakers. And this game could go a long way in determining who eventually makes it to the Big 12 championship game with a chance to go to the college football playoff. Obviously, talking about Kansas State, Iowa State. This game will kick off noon Eastern on ESPN. Kansas State, 3-point favorite, total sitting 49.5. There's been some movement, but not a ton. Look, when I look at this game, I know that you like Iowa State. I'm super, super low on the Cyclones. I think their defense takes a step back in who they lost. I think more importantly, their offense, they lost their two best offensive linemen, their center and left tackle, who both are flirting with NFL rosters. And then they lost the 2,000-yard receivers, the only two who did that besides the Ohio State pair, which did it in the national title with a couple extra games. I'm looking at this depth chart. The offensive line worries me. The wide receiver room, I think, is going to take a clear step back. And I do think that Iowa State is going to get back to multiple tight ends. That's a position of strength. They're going to try to run the ball, but I don't think they can run block. And that Kansas State's, their strength this season and last is going to be their run defense. Now, where I'm concerned about Kansas State is in the secondary. And, their secondary had, especially at safety, there was a lot of miscommunication last year, and they would give up explosives, and it wasn't as good as the talent would have suggested. They lost 2 to the NFL. And you look at their depth chart now, there's a ton of inexperience. And there's a couple guys that they were counting on that might not suit up, including Maldonado, who's going to be their free safety, the Arizona transfer. He might play. He wasn't on the depth chart, but then Kleiman came out and said he's questionable. Same with Newsome. That one of the other safeties who was expected to contribute is doubtful. So their secondary, if you just look down the depth chart, it is extremely inexperienced. However, I don't think Iowa State is primed to fully take advantage with their receiving room and their offensive line in its current form. So I think the Iowa State offense might struggle. On the other side of the ball, Iowa State has to replace a couple of key contributors in that secondary, a couple that are on the NFL, and then their leader in Freiler. I don't think they're going to get a ton of pressure. Kansas State, I don't love their wide receivers, but I didn't love their wide receiver room last year. I think that they can pretty much be on par. I really like their tight end room. And then when it comes to their offensive line, the positions to watch there for me are the tackle positions. Fitzpatrick, the Ohio State transfer, was probably going to start, but he got hurt. He won't be playing. So they lost a lot of talent, the offensive line coach up front. So I'm a bit concerned about their offensive line, but I don't think Iowa State can fully take advantage. Where I think the difference in this game is Avery Johnson's legs. This is game 1, a conference game. Kansas State's offense is at its best when he's healthy and running. And I think you unleash him here. It's the first game of the year. It's going to be the healthiest he'll be all year. And it's a high leverage game. So I think they can unleash his legs here. So I like Kansas State. There's a ton of uncertainty here. But I played the -3. I make this closer to 5. What are you seeing with Iowa State, Kansas State? I saw you played Kansas State, even though you love Iowa State. Where do you stand with this game?
I mean, I said this on our Big 12 podcast. Like whoever wins this game is they are in the pole position for the Big 12. I mean, this counts as a neutral, then you get 4-4 for your conference schedule, home and away. And I liked Iowa State a lot. And then I started digging on this game. And at the same time I started digging on this game to make notes for this podcast, that number got whacked down to 2.5. I said, it's just too far. I mean, I even said on our podcast, I make this game closer to 4.5 to 5. I think maybe 6. Like, I got to look at the power ratings, but whatever you make neutral site and what your PRs are, it's definitely above what 2.5 is. And then I started digging into Rocco Beck's numbers. I know Iowa State. I think I put this in the app that, Iowa State has covered 5 straight. I think they've won 4 or 5 and they've covered 5 straight against Kansas State, but this isn't a trends podcast. You still have to do your homework. Well, I did my homework, and Rocco Beck, even though I was touting around that he's dropped his turnover worthy play rate every single season, have you seen what he's done against Kansas State? It's not really good. So last year he went 13 to 35 for 2 TDs, but he didn't have any big time throws, and he had 3 turnover worthy plays, 3 big mistakes, plenty of deep shots against the secondary. He had an ADOT of 12.4. So really, he just kind of got bailed out on a 13 to 35 day against that Kansas State secondary. He doesn't have those wide receiver options anymore. So if you go back 2 years ago when he played Kansas State, right? Kind of the same coaching mold, same coaching staff, same scheme that he's going to look at. 8 for 12, 3 TDs, 0 big time throws, and a turnover worthy play. So if you go and look at this, the last 2 years, what Rocco Becht has done against Kansas State's secondary, he has 50 passing attempts, and he has yet to complete a single big time throw in his history of 2 years against Kansas State's defense. So you're going to say, well, they're going to run the ball. Well, the strength of Kansas State, like you said, is the defensive line. They were 15th in line yards last year. They returned plenty to the defensive line in the linebacker unit. They were 5th in defensive rushing success rate. They were 83rd in containing EPA, which I don't expect. So the big question is Carson Hansen, is he going to be able to bulldoze through this Kansas State defensive line? I don't think so. Is Abu Sama going to somehow return to form from 2023 when he carried for 273 yards against his defense and created 13 missed tackles in this game? I haven't seen that or heard about that coming out of from Abu Sama, so I'm a little bit nervous about that too. You go to the other side of the ball, Kansas State lost 29-21 in Ames last year, but Stuck, what is the reason that they lost this game? I mean, they outgained Iowa State by 2 yards per play in that box score last year. How'd they lose this game?
I think all but one opponent last year.
Yeah. I mean, hidden yards. Iowa State had plus 226 hidden yards. Field position started at the 40-yard line. We're talking Avery Johnson fumble on the opening drive. Keegan Johnson fumbling after a reception. A missed field goal here. Like, Kansas State just couldn't get out of their own way, and it's the reason that they lost this game. If everything plays out without the turnovers and the dumb mistakes, Kansas State wins that game last year. So, Avery Johnson had an intentional grounding safety. It's just unheard of shit, like Iowa State voodoo that got them through. You look at Avery Johnson's numbers against Iowa State last year, 3 big time throws, 1 turnover worthy play. He had 82 rushing yards on designed calls for his number. But that critical fumble to start the game is what really sunk them in. So yeah, I did take Kansas State minus 2.5. Am I going to come back on Iowa State? I would be enticed at 4, 5, 6. Again, this is a game that's being played over in Ireland. We've had some wild events happen over there. If I can middle around 3, I will. For those of you that didn't get the 2.5, I would just sit on the Kansas State minus 3. The total is where I started doing some studying, because in the past 3 years, and I have to go back to the pandemic. I'll never forget when you and I handicapped, I think it was BYU and Navy, and no one tackled. Because in the pandemic, I remember Navy was like tackling tires. It seems like tackling fundamentals is a serious problem in week 0 games, and it continues to be. So what's going to happen in this game when this has been played, this Aer Lingus Dublin Classic? A minimum of 28 points has been scored the last 3 years in the first half of this game. And if you look at these two teams, when they played each other, Kansas State and Iowa State, when they've actually been in form and they played later in the year, they've topped 60 points 2 straight years. So something is going on with these two coaching staffs where they know how to get points up against each other. And it's going to be 65 degrees, possibly chance of a little bit of a wet ball. I think there's 25% chance of showers coming through. I took the first half over on this game. It's at 24 at a couple of shops. 24.5 is still sitting out there this morning. These Aer Lingus Dublin series have equated to a ton of points with offenses like Northwestern, Nebraska. I mean, there have been some bad offenses that have been over there, and they've still scored over 28 points in the first half. So I like the first half over in this game. I think it'll tighten up when some tackling fundamentals come in. Maybe Iowa State figures out what they're going to do on offense early. And maybe Kansas State fumbles the ball, gives Iowa State field position again. I think all of that is in play for points to be scored early. Kansas State minus 2.5, minus 3. That's the side when you look at all the numbers that you put out there, especially considering Becht has been horrible against Kansas State.
And it looks like both teams had a similar travel schedule this week. I think I would have left early, but I don't think there's any edge there. But what I'm watching for Kansas State in particular, their right side of the offensive line, I think they're going to be fine at center, left guard, left tackle. They're very experienced and they have a lot of size, but new right guard, right tackle from Penn State and Pitt. The right guard, maybe it's line gang, but I think it's probably going to be the Penn State and Pitt transfer. We'll see how they fare. But the secondary is my biggest concern, and I'm just not sure Iowa State can fully take advantage. You look at that Kansas State secondary, because if both of their safeties don't play, you're looking at, VJ Payne is back. He's the experienced one back there, but not great. Then you're going to have one of the safety spots. You're going to have a West Georgia transfer. You're going to have either a sophomore or a true freshman at the other safety spot. When you're in their 3 safety looks at corner, it's 2 sophomores. And that is my biggest question, but I'm not sure Iowa State is fully built to take advantage. And I think that Kansas State front 7 can hold up. I get what you're saying, the total. My first thought was first half under, but just because I think that it's going to take some time. This Iowa State offense, I don't think is built to take advantage of Kansas State's defense. And I think Iowa State will still do a good job of taking away explosive plays, but and it's not like the Kansas State passing attack is extremely explosive with their weapons on the outside.
But the Kansas State inside zone is going to take advantage of that new defensive line from Iowa State. They should be moving that pile every time. To me, it's more of, are you going to get into scoring position? Yes. And can Iowa State run a trick play and get into the secondary of Kansas State? I bet you they will at least once. I bet you something will be dialed up.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll get there on the under, but it's was something that I was looking at. But I do think Iowa State takes a big step back this year. I know they have a ton of depth at linebacker because of all the injuries last year. But outside of Orange on the interior of the defensive line, not totally in love. And then the offensive line is it's in flux right now. And I'm not sure they'll be able to run block. So yeah, I like Kansas State, but we'll learn a lot about both teams due to a lot of the change. And that's the case across college football.